Greetings. I'm going to try to give now a brief history of where this idea of unarmed civilian peacekeeping or peace teams came from. And I'm happy to do this. I think that peace teams provide potentially a powerful antidote to the war system. So if we ask ourselves, what is war? In a way, war is the institutionalization on a very large scale of an innate human or animal potential, or it used to be called an instinct. Animals fight. Humans hate one another. They exhibit violence against one another. And someone comes along and says, we could use this. We could fund it and train people for it and create institutions around it and have a powerful force that we can use. They think that they can use it for purposes of defense. It never really works out that way, but nonetheless, we definitely have an innate capacity that is inherited in nature, built up into an enormous institution by human effort over a period of millennia. Now, if we turn that on its head, there is also an inbuilt potential for peacemaking in animals. And I used to say that the peace team idea was referenced as in an episode that's attributed to the Buddha. I used to say that there was a Chinese philosopher, Mo Tzu, who was used to go around interposing himself and deflecting quarrels and creating peace between rival kings, emperors in ancient China. But I really had no idea until recently how ancient this institution is. With your permission, I'm going to read you a little bit from a book by Frans de Waal, who's a really great primatologist, on chimpanzee behavior. He talks about a chimp by the name of Phineas, who had been an alpha male, but when he turned 40, he began to take it easy. I didn't retire in that way, but I guess Phineas was a little smarter. But Phineas used to play with the juveniles and so forth. But reading now from de Waal, as soon as he heard a squabble, Phineas would go over to make a big show of force with all his hair on end to break it up. He would stand between the contestants until the screaming stopped. This control role is also well documented in wild chimpanzees. Now, here's the really remarkable part. Remarkably, males in this role don't take sides. They defend the weaker party even if the attacker is their best buddy. Anyone who is involved in the peace team movement will recognize why I was so struck by that observation. It's because one of the biggest concerns we have in peace teams is nonpartisanship. If you want to be a third party who is not taking sides in the conflict, then you have to practice nonpartisanship. It doesn't mean that you won't intervene to defend the weaker party, but it means that you're not against the stronger party. In fact, if the stronger party becomes more vulnerable, is attacked, you will defend that party. You are for peace. You are not for one side or the other. Not too long ago, there was an episode among Michigan peace teams. They are now called Meta peace teams, Meta with one T, where there was an anti-Klan attack on a Klan rally. A Klansman was beaten to the ground by these anti-Ku Klux Klan, anti-racist people. And one of the people on the peace team who was standing nearby was an African-American woman. She jumped on top of this man to protect him. Here he is, a Klansman who hates black people, but that's not the issue. The issue is fighting has broken out, and we want to stop it. So just as war is the implementation, the institutionalization of a very natural impulse, peace teams are the institutionalization of a very natural impulse that happens to be much more helpful. Now, every parent knows that we have this impulse. When our children are fighting, or even when other children are fighting, we want to step in to break it up. So the family, friendships, these are institutions which depend on that same impulse. But the great institutionalizer and scientific systematizer of all nonviolent potentials was Mahatma Gandhi. And one of his dreams was the creation of what he called the Shanti Sena, or the Peace Army. His vision was that you would have volunteers in every community who would live in the community, be trusted by community members, be available for various services, especially the kinds of services that kick in when you're on your way to a conflict. One of those, for example, would be, and still is today, rumor abatement. One community will come in and say, oh my God, the Hindus have killed a Muslim, or vice versa. They would go out and find out that this was a rumor, and they'd be able to stop that thing from blowing up out of all proportion. Tragically enough, Gandhi was scheduled to go to a major meeting to set up Shanti Senas the very morning after his assassination at the end of January in 1948. That was, of course, a blow to the movement. Nonetheless, two leaders, actually three eventually, Vinoba Bhave, Narayan Desai, and Jayaprakash Narayan, did play a role in developing the Shanti Sena in India. And they were able to be of some service at key conflictual moments, like the getting the Portuguese to withdraw from Goa, and then under even more tense circumstances, the Chinese border incursion of 1962. So they were able to be of some help, but they didn't really flourish. But the dream never died, and it was picked up in the 1980s. You have this little book by Charlie Walker. Charles has passed on. Now it's called the World Peace Guard, an unarmed agency for peacekeeping, published by the Academy of Gandhian Studies in India. And the idea there was to get a major world institution like the UN to pick up unarmed peacekeeping as a mechanism. A little bit later than that, you have this report on a global peace service consultation that took place in 1994. And so the idea does go on. But the institution also is being slowly developed. In 1981, there was a famous meeting on Grindstone Island in eastern Canada, which led to the creation of something called Peace Brigades International, which is still a flourishing organization today. They have country teams all over the world. They have operated like most peace teams in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. And they have specialized in one particular practice, which is known as protective accompaniment. In protective accompaniment, you are called in. That's another important quality or practice among peace teams. You do not impose yourself in a situation if you're not being called in by at least one of the parties, hopefully by both. And when called in to protect, for example, a threatened human rights worker, you will delegate someone to accompany that person 24/7. No one who has been directly accompanied by a peace team member, volunteer, has ever been killed. For that matter, no one who's carrying out peace team work of precisely this kind has ever been killed, although there have been some close calls and people doing somewhat similar things have been killed. So that's protective accompaniment. And I know at one time PBI was considering whether they should make that their whole mandate, and they decided not to. Now, in the 1990s, of course, you have the development by two American activists and organizers, Mel Duncan from Minnesota and David Hartsoe from San Francisco, who met at the Hague Peace Conference in 1991, if I'm not mistaken, to create a peace team organization on a global scale. And that is exactly what they have done. It's called Nonviolent Peace Force, and it operates right now in the Caucasus, South Sudan, Mindanao. It has operated, in fact, its first operation was in Sri Lanka. And what they do is they collect and train volunteers from around the world and make them available in intense conflict situations after studying the situation, ascertaining that they can go in there and be of some good, and ascertaining if this has the potential to otherwise escalate into a major conflict and cause tremendous suffering. They will go in to protect human rights and, if necessary, to interpose themselves, which has spontaneously been done from time to time. There was a spectacular incidence of it in the 1960s in the Sahara between the Polisario Front and the Moroccan government. But there are groups that are returning to Gandhi's original image or vision of having this carried out locally and domestically. And in fact, at the Metta Center here, we are helping to bring into being something called the Shanti Sena Network, which will provide materials that will help groups that want to have a peace team in their community, how to do it, what's meant by nonviolence, how do you practice it in these situations, how do you train for it, what kind of uniforms do you wear, what's your relationship with the media, etc. So that, in very brief compass, is an overview of the history of an extremely important institution known as peace teams or unarmed civilian peacekeeping. At one time, we were calling it third-party nonviolent intervention, and that was a good name too, but right now it's UCP, or unarmed civilian peacekeeping, and it really bids fair to become a global force for peace, which would require, somewhere on the order of magnitude of maybe 3% of the global military budget to do a tremendous amount of good, unmixed by harm. Thank you very much.